Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Just a heads up, we are recording now. Welcome to today's virtual training on the 2024 updates to the Super Circular. Today is August 29th. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm going to be your virtual training facilitator today. Just some things to note. If you guys could change your name in Teams to reflect your first and your last name, that's going to make it a lot easier for us to take attendance. And if you're not yet registered for the training, or if you're maybe viewing with a few different people from work together, if you could please let us know that in the chat so that we can make sure we're getting everybody registered. Only registered attendees are going to get certificates of completion for the course. And if you're having any issues, my email is there, brookewarrington@semtribe.com. You can shoot me an email if you're not able to use the chat to communicate with me for any reason. So just a quick disclaimer, please. This virtual training provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted session format. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. And then we also have our copyright infringement law pictured here. So just a friendly reminder that the virtual training presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Okay. So the presentation slides for today, Vince's presentation, they are available to you for download on our website. So the link, I just sent it into the chat, and then it was also included with your know before you go that you were emailed. If everybody could take a second to mute their microphones, it'll cut down on feedback as we go through the training. I thought they were disabled. I tried to, but I don't know if that worked. So forgive me if at any point you are able to unmute during the presentation. I'm going to go ahead and mute you just so we can make sure that the sound quality is best as possible. We do encourage you to participate today by using the chat and using the reactions, and I'm going to go through how you use those right now. So if you want to utilize your Teams chat, you can just look to the top menu at the top of your screen, and you will see a little chat bubble. It'll probably say chat underneath it. If you click on that, you'll be able to expand the full virtual training chat that we'll have going today. If you want to send a message, you could just go down to where it says type a message. You'll click in there, type up whatever you want to say, and then you can hit enter to send it in, or you can click on the little paper airplane icon, and that'll send it in as well. If you want to raise your hand, you can go up to the top of your screen. There's a little hand icon there. You'll be able to raise your hand to draw attention to yourself for whatever reason. You could also just use reactions today. That's also at the top of your screen. There's a little smiley face icon. If you click on that, you have the option to like or love, show applause, laugh, surprise, and there will just be a little picture that briefly pops up by your name. All right, near the end of today's virtual training, we're gonna take a group picture. So at that time, I'll invite everybody to turn on their camera by clicking on the camera icon button. I'll put us in together mode on the screen. It kind of makes us look like we're sitting in like auditorium seating. And then we'll just take a quick group picture, but we'll do that near the end on one of your breaks. All right, guys, if you want to say hello, we can get that chat going today. You could let us know your name, where you're joining us from, tribal affiliation, and your work or your role that you fulfill, probably what brought you to today's training in the first place. And with that, I'm going to introduce your instructor, Vince Franco. And Vince, I'm going to stop sharing so that you can take over.
Okay, Brooke, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Very good. I'm going to try to share. Hello, everybody. All 47 of you, plus Brooke and other staff from the NLC that might be joining us. As Brooke said, I'm Vince Franco, and I'm going to facilitate the training today and tomorrow. And in just a minute, I am going to share my screen. I can see your chat box. I can see the chat box right now. I appreciate everyone. I recognize some names popping up in there. Hello, everybody. But as soon as I share my screen, I won't be able to see the chat box. So I'm going to rely on Brooke to kind of keep an eye on it. If you have questions, like she said, or comments or concerns, or want to share anything, please do. in the chat box, and we will do the best we can to keep an eye on that. Brooke might have to do that on my behalf, and then when questions or concerns or comments come up, she will just interject. A couple other housekeeping things. I will try to take a break at the top of the hour. So 2 o'clock my time in a little less than 30 minutes, I'll take a break. And then the hour after that, 3 o'clock my time, Eastern time, we'll do it again. We have two sessions. We have one today where we're going to go through roughly half the material, and this will become more clear as I'm going through the presentation. I'll show you in a minute exactly what I'm going to be presenting today. And hopefully you'll join us again tomorrow, same time, same place, to go over the second half of the material, all of it being important. If you receive any kind of federal funding from any of the federal agencies, then this information is going to be of vital concern to you. We're going to navigate our way through the federal regulations, the regulations that are provided, developed by the Office of Management and Budget, known as OMB. You can consider OMB to be kind of the parent organization to all the federal agencies. They are the ones that develop what's called the uniform guidance for federal. Basically, it has several names. It's the federal regulations. It's also known as 2 CFR Part 200 uniform guidance. It's also known as the super circular. And the reason it was called the super, that's kind of fading away. That name super circular is fading away over time because that's the kind of the street name or the nickname that was given to the program, to the uniform guidance back around 2013, 2014, when it all came together. The OMB took several old citations and consolidated them into a super document, as they called it at the time, the super circular. That's where the name came from. Now, what is it now? Close to 10 years later, and several generations of changes, including a most recent change to some of the citations in the uniform guidance, we've gotten away from that title, super circular, and just referred to it either as the federal regulations or 2 CFR Part 200 or the uniform guidance. So I wanted to put that out there straight away because as I go through the presentation, I find myself using all of those names interchangeably, and they basically mean the same thing. So what we're going to be looking at is the kind of the mother of all the federal regulations, and the goal here is to present this information in a way that by the time we finish here, you'll be able to have a better understanding of how to navigate, how to search, how to interpret, and how to implement these regulations. And in a way, meeting the letter of the law, still be able to use these regulations or adjust them or interpret them in a way that works best for your organization, for your tribal entity or nonprofit or whatever you may be, school entity, insurance or hospital. Keep in mind that the uniform guidance was written for all agencies, programs, organizations that receive federal funding. That's what I mean. But when I say we're going to learn how to navigate, we're going to learn how to search, and we're going to learn how to interpret these regulations. So as you're posting some things, I can still see, hello, everyone. Well, now we have over 50 people in the session, which is wonderful. I'm going to try to share my screen here. This is the one we want. Okay. Here we go. Now I'm going to convert that or try to convert that to a full screen. Okay, there we go.
Yep, we can see it perfect.
Very good. Okay, now we are off. Okay, here's what, if you are interested in highlights and updates to the uniform guidance, specifically kind of with a focus under the legislation of NAHASDA. Native American Housing Administration Self-Determination Act of 1996. Someone ask a question? Okay. If not, keep going. I thought I heard somebody asking
Already
questions.
had Teams downloaded.
Okay, I'm hearing somebody. Is that a question for me? If not, we're going to keep going. 2 CFR Part 200, aka super circular, and some statutory requirements that are built in to the uniform guidance. Seldom do we see them, and I want to share these with you. There's about 6 of them. Statutory requirements are what they are basically are executive orders. Under the Trump administration, there were 5 or 6 executive orders. And that administration had a difficult time passing anything through legislation, proper legislation. So executive orders seem to be the way that they put some of these laws into effect. Statutory requirements reflect that. I'll show you that once we get in. Today, we'll actually talk about some of those all of them actually, the statutory requirements that are integrated into the uniform guidance. And then we'll also go today, and I'll show you when we get to the agenda, we'll do subparts A, B, and C of the 6 components of the uniform guidance. And then tomorrow, D, E, and F, and Appendix 1 and 2. That's the plan at least that's the plan. All right. A little bit about this is my company. Before you look at this, keep in mind I was with the Native Learning Center, which is a department of the Seminole Tribe of Florida, since 2011. I was with them until the time that I retired back in late 2022, just 2 years ago. So I was with them 11, 12 years doing this very same thing. And then when I retired, I started the company, Next Venture Consulting, and I continued doing the same thing, training that I was doing while being the compliance director at the Native Learning Center. But the other thing I want to point out in this screen, other than the very cool logos and all that kind of stuff, are the QR codes. You'll see QR codes peppered throughout the presentation. I love QR codes. If you've got a smartphone in your possession right now, go to your camera and see if you can open up your camera on your smartphone and see if those 2 QR codes, the top one should take you directly in real time to the NLC's website. It should. And then the bottom one should do the same, but it would take you to the Seminole Tribe of Florida's website in real time. Both of those QR codes should work. I love using QR codes. I pepper them throughout the program, the training where I can, because I'll be talking about something, and you'll see as we progress through the program, I'll be talking about, for example, Davis-Bacon legislation. I'll put the QR code up and bam, get your smartphone out. It'll take you right there to the legislation or to the regulations, whatever it may be. And I use them a lot. I think they're a valuable resource for training. And so keep those in mind. If I'm not mistaken, you'll be able to download this presentation after we're done here. It might be next week after the holiday before it becomes available. I know Brooke will correct me if I'm mistaken, but you should be able to download the presentation and the voiceover for this. So you really don't have to worry a whole lot about trying to wrap your head around all the different stuff that I'm going to be presenting to you in the next 2 days. I've been doing this for 14 years now. I understand these regulations inside and out. What I'm going to try to present to you, other than navigating and searching and interpreting, um, also a comparison between where the regulations are now and where they're going to change, and the significant or non-significance of those changes. Would be just rolled out new changes to the uniform guidance. Some of them could be considered significant for your tribe or tribal entity, and others you might go, well, okay, it's not something that we deal with every day. We don't need to worry about it, but you do need to understand where the regulations were and where they are. Now, what you'll see as we progress through the program, in fact, let's go to start looking at course description and the agenda. As it says, and it's kind of I've been alluding to, two-part virtual training session provides building blocks, fundamentals basically for understanding the responsibilities, obligations, requirements, and even some best practices and anecdotal stories that I will share with you, best practices that I've learned from going to several other tribes across the country and anecdotal stories from those visits and from my tenure at the Native Learning Center, Seminole Tribal, Florida. For federal grants management, we'll start off with a little bit of grants management and then segue into the actual statutory requirements and then the regulations. And with always keeping in mind a kind of a twist, or not so much a twist, but a focus on NAHASDA. So, you know, the Native Learning Center, its funding was through HUD, through the Office of Native American Programs, because it fell under the jurisdiction of the NAHASDA legislation. We got the Indian Housing Block Grant. So I tend to focus on these federal guidelines, and some of the stories and anecdotal things I'm going to share with you would pertain to housing as we use the Indian Housing Block Grant. But if you receive any kind of federal funding and you're any kind of an entity, nonprofit or tribal entity or school or hospital, whatever it may be, you're going to, if you're receiving federal funds, you're going to have to understand the ins and outs of these federal regulations. So here specifically is what we're going to do. Right, I'm in the top left corner right now, just getting into day one, part one, highlights of grants management. Before I get into the actual regulations and the changes thereof, I want to take a little time at first here to talk about managing these federal regulations. So I'm going to talk about resources. I'm going to talk a little bit, not a whole lot in this section, but touch on award documents and how to read federal award documents and how to look for very important information that's contained on those award documents, terms and conditions as well. I'm going to talk about one of the most important, two very important things for any grants manager or program director dealing with federal funds. One is spelled out there, self-monitoring. Another way to refer to that is internal auditing, unofficial but mandatory self-monitoring of your program. And with that comes the requirement of what's called internal controls. I'll get into that a little deeper. The only way, in my opinion, that anyone can understand and put together internal controls for an agency or an organization or a tribal entity that is receiving federal funds is to understand the big picture. So that's what I'm going to try to do today in part two and part three and part four that you see on the screen there. But today we're going to focus on day one, part one, and part two. I'm going to start off with part one, obviously, and then continue on with records and record retention. And then the bottom bullet there, regulatory and compliance. Very, very important. Compliance, self-monitoring, internal controls, those in operational functions, very, very important features of being able to properly manage your federal award, no matter what agency you're receiving funds from. Keep in mind, these apply to all federal agencies and any kind of federal fund you're receiving, whether it's through HUD, Department of Energy, EPA, labor, education. It doesn't really matter. These are the parent, kind of the parental regulations that we have to understand. So today, column on the left, part one, part two. And then tomorrow, I'll continue on with part, as you can, that top right box up there, more highlights of the uniform guidance, in particular, the ones that really pertain to us as recipients of federal funds, Part D, E, and F. Part D being post-federal award requirements. In other words, the requirements that are mandatory after we receive the award. Also, Part E, very important, cost principles. In other words, what is allowable, what is not allowable? Where can we spend our money? How do we determine what is reasonable? All those kind of things. That's in Part E. And then Part F, audits. Audits and program reviews. How do we prepare for the audit? What are the auditors are going to be looking for? What are the auditors' marching orders to conduct what's referred to as a single audit? Those are the audits that are very specific to those of us that are recipients of federal funds at a certain monetary threshold. So I'm going to go over the old and the new requirements, federal requirements in all of those areas. And then bottom right, part 4, more focus, kind of going back a little bit and touching on the three, what's referred to as the 3 pillars of internal controls: operation, financial activities, and compliance. Okay, those are the 3 most important subgroups that make up internal controls. Internal controls are a requirement. When we get to that part, what is an internal control? That's in Subpart C over on your left side. We'll get to that Subpart C, pre-federal award requirements. That's where we learn about self-monitoring, internal controls, competition, procurement, sealed bid, sole source, all of those kind of procurement things. That's going to be the second half of today's presentation. Time, time allowed. So that's kind of the game plan. Today we're going to try to get through the left side of the agenda. Tomorrow we're going to try desperately to get through the right side. There's a lot, folks. There's a lot of information here. A lot of information. And again, I've been doing this for a long time. I understand the ins and outs. And if I am moving too quickly through these sections because I understand them inside and out, let me know, put something in the chat box. Also, do not worry about, getting every single detail verbatim of discussion here. This is, as I said before, and as Brooke said, this information will be available to you. You can do this too. You can always reach out to the Native Learning Center if you have a specific question about the interpretation of any of these regulations and how they need to be applied on a local level to work for you. If you have specific those are kind of personal questions because every tribe is unique. Send those through the Native Learning Center. Send an email to Brooke at the Native Learning Center. Send them to anyone at the Native Learning Center. They will forward them to me, and then I will respond to you. I promise you that. I will respond. Email is the best way to get a hold of me. I will respond. If I do not know the answer, I will not guess. I will go to the federal regulations and research. I do this every day, and I've been doing it for 14 years, searching for answers. Where did that regulation come from? What does it mean? How do I interpret it? How do I apply it at a local level for my tribe, still meeting the letter of the law, but working with it with a way that fits our needs? We can do that. And that's what I mean by interpreting these regulations, because I'm going to show you, particularly when we get into Subpart C, bottom left there, in about an hour or so, how vague some of these federal regulations are. When the regulations are vague, they don't really tell us how to do something. That means we have to develop our own procedures to, interpret these things to the best ability we can and to implement them in a way that protects our program, protects ourselves and protects our program. We're going to talk about that. That is the highest level of program management and interpretation of federal regulations. And that's what we're going to try to do, interpret and implement. Oops. Okay. Again, if you have any questions, put them out there, or comments or concerns, put them out there. We will try to address them without guessing, without speculating, without sweeping them under the rug. Try to give you an accurate answer in real time. Personally, I don't like saving the questions to the end, the very end. If you have questions, obviously it's a concern and we want to address them, unless it's too deep, too complicated, and too personal. Then we might have to have a sidebar conversation or pick that up subsequently in email discussions. Um, a poll, and I think I know the answer to this of the group. How familiar are you with grants management processes as it relates to the federal regulations? Got four options here. My educated guess is most people are going to be in the B and C category, and we'll have some extremes in the A and D. Most, A, I'm not aware of any of these regulations at all. Tell me more. B, I've heard of them, but don't know all the details, which is the bulk of most people. Kind of know what the uniform guidance is, but I don't know, all the citations and regulations. And C, I know a little bit. I've worked with them. I'm a little bit familiar with them, but I don't know them by heart. And then D would be a person like myself, kind of the resident expert, knows how to navigate, understands, and can interpret these things and apply them, most importantly, the highest level. Be able to not only navigate and find and interpret, but implement them in a way that doesn't break any rules or protocols, but works for the organization. I have some perfect examples coming up. We'll get to them. I want to share them with you. Brooke, did you get any takers on that poll? Are you there? Okay.
You did, yes.
Okay. Let me go back. I
You
thought
got
everyone.
some C's, some D's, one A, two A's. A lot of C's and D's and two A's.
A lot of D's, a lot of people who are very knowledgeable, very good. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. And
I
thank you
think
very
C
much.
is probably the most that you
Yeah,
received.
as expected, as expected. Know a little bit about it. And
Ooh, we got some B's in the
congratulations,
house as well.
B's in the house. Okay, and
Mm-hmm.
congratulations those A's and B's, but that actually said, I don't know much about it or don't know anything about it. You're in the right place. For those Ds, I hope none of this is too redundant for you, but it's always good to get a refresher. It's always good to look at these regulations from a different perspective, mine in particular, over the next 2 days, and my take on things. And so we'll just keep on going. Thank you for replying to that poll. It helps me get an understanding and kind of gauge the presentation or my expectations anyway of the audience here. Always want, as a presenter, you always want to try to gauge your presentation to the audience, and it's good to know kind of where everyone falls. So a couple of resources, a lot of QR codes here. Again, I tell you, I like them a lot. So let's start from the left and go to the right. QR code in the far left it is a QR code that should take you to the uniform guidance, to CFR Part 2. In fact, I have my smartphone here with me. I'm going to double check and make sure for me while I'm doing that they work, that they do take me. Okay, I just scanned the QR code in the far left, and indeed, it took me to Part 2 Uniform Guidance, Code of Federal Regulations. Very good. Now, let me point something out here. Couple things when it comes to the uniform guidance. Keep in mind there have been changes to the O&B's uniform guidance to CFR Part 200. So whenever you go there, if you're doing a Google search or if you're using a QR code to take you there, make sure when you get there, like if you're doing it right now, if you've got your smartphone and you've scanned that QR code like I just did, you want to make sure you've got the most recent version. Now I used the QR code. I'm looking at my smartphone. It took me to the Code of Federal Regulation, specifically to Part 200. and it says displaying Title II up to date as of August 27th, which was just 2 days ago. All right, Title II was last amended August 26th, 3 days ago. So I have reasonable assurance. I'll get back to that phrase in a minute, reasonable assurance. I have reasonable assurance that this is the most up-to-date version that I'm looking at, and that's what you want to make sure that you are looking at the most recent version when you do a Google search or use a QR code like here. Now, underneath there, at the bottom left, Code of Federal Regulations, you see that ecfr.gov? I like using that search engine. Whenever I Google um, the uniform guidance or 2 CFR Part 200 or a specific citation like 2 CFR Part 200.303, once I enter that in my Google search engine optimization is going to give me some options to select to go to that actual site. And usually at the top of that list is ecfr.gov. I like that particular search engine because on it's easy to read. It is the Federal Register if you've ever gone to it before, but it's laid out in a narrative style as opposed to the original, the OG, original version of the Code of Federal Regulation, which is laid out like a newspaper with very thin columns. Kind of difficult to navigate, kind of difficult to read, especially online. So ecfr.gov gives us the equivalent of it, doesn't change any of the verbiage. It just lays it out in a much more user-friendly and readable format. So a couple pro tips there. Keep in mind when you go to uniform guidance that you're looking at the most up-to-date version. And the other thing is using ecfr.gov. All right, we are at the top of the hour, 2 o'clock Eastern time, my time, regardless of where you're joining me from. We are at the top of the hour. We're going to take a quick break um, of 5 minutes just to give you a break, stretch your legs, check your emails, do what you need to do. I'll do the same. We'll reconvene at 7 minutes after the hour, 2 o'clock my time. So 2:07 or 3:07 if you're in no earlier. I guess 1:07 if you're in Central and so on. Just 5 minutes and then we'll come back and continue on. Okay. So I'm going to mute my microphone for just a minute and I'll see you back in about 5 minutes. All right. Welcome back. We're going to keep going here. Two more QR codes on there, and I want to point these out to you. One in the very middle, dead middle of the screen there, very important. Davis-Bacon and related acts, legislation under Davis-Bacon, DBRA, final rule. The reason it's here is those of us that do any type of construction, housing construction, heavy highway, commercial construction, or renovation. This was a deal with the Native Learning Center because it received funds through the Indian Housing Block Grant, which were housing driven. If you use $2,000 or more of your federal funds for housing, construction, or any type of construction, not just housing, but construction or rehabilitation, you have moved into another area of federal regulations, and that is Davis-Bacon regulations or DBRA. Now, Davis-Bacon, you may have heard of this or not. It's been around since the Nixon administration, created around 1970. So it's an old timer, but it just went through, I'm thinking maybe its second maybe third over what, 60 years or 50 years at least of being in existence. It's third generation of updates. That's it. But it just rolled out less than a year ago, about 6 months ago. Davis-Bacon legislation was updated. Now, the good news is there aren't a lot of issues or updates with the legislation, either in prevailing wage or certified payroll records. Those are all part of Davis-Bacon. Nothing of major significance You can look at it yourself. There's the QR code that will take you to the final rule updating Davis-Bacon and related acts regulations. I would suggest that if you receive any federal funding, and if you're going to use any of that funding for construction or rehab of anything, housing, road construction, infrastructure, et cetera, then you get familiar with Davis-Bacon. We just don't have time today or tomorrow. That'd be a whole dedicated program. And Native Learning Center does do training on Davis-Bacon, and we could do something on this down the road, and it would be a dedicated virtual training or webinar or on-site training. But I want to bring it to your attention because it's part of the federal regulations. It's another level of federal regulations, Davis-Bacon and related acts. If you're using any of your federal funds for construction or rehab, it has a very low threshold. $2,000 is nothing. That's that's pocket change almost. I mean, $2,000 to do construction with the cost of lumber these days, it's easy to trip that and be in the realm, a whole nother realm of federal regulation. So mark that. If you're not familiar with it, make a note, mark that. The one on the bottom right is sam.gov. Sam.gov replaced a couple years ago, replaced a couple different things. One was what was referred to as the DUNS number that we used to use as an entity that received federal funds. It was a federal tracking number that we were supposed to use. Now that is gone. It has been replaced by something else. I'm getting out my phone myself, my smartphone, and it does take you to sam.gov. And if you're following along on your smartphone and scan that QR code, it will take you to sam.gov specifically to the unique entity identifier known as the UEI. That UEI, unique entity identifier, replaced the DUNS number a couple of years ago. Actually, specifically on April 4th, 2022. So what? Just a little more than 2 years ago, DUNS number was phased out, UEI was phased in. A unique entity ID is a 12-character alphanumeric ID assigned by sam.gov. So if you're not familiar with it, it behooves you to do a deeper dive. Use the QR code there if you wish. And you need to have every organization that receives, if you have federal funds, you've got a UEI number because you wouldn't be able to apply and receive federal funds without the UEI. And if you're not familiar with it, you need to be familiar. So take advantage of the link here. Either go to sam.gov or use the QR code for the fast track to take you there and navigate your way through that site. Get a little familiar with what sam.gov provides. It's more there than just a UEI number. We just don't have time to do a deeper dive on sam.gov or Davis-Bacon. We're kind of focusing on the top left, the uniform guidance, which is a piece of work all in itself. So we'll keep going here. Here's a few more. Now I'm moving over with a little bit of a focus on housing. I know not all of you are housing focused, but here are some QR code links. The top left is the IHBG, Indian Housing Block Grant, which is administered through the Office of Native American Programs, which is a subdivision of HUD. You see that over on the bottom right. That is in fact, I want to see if that takes you to HUD or to ONAP. I don't even remember myself, so I'm going to get my phone out, see where it takes me to. I think it's going to take me to HUD. And kind of slow. Okay, got it. Yeah, it took me directly to HUD. But from there, you can navigate your way through the HUD's website to get to ONAP if you need to or anything else. And smack dab in the middle there is our friendly legislation that pertains to the Indian Housing Block Grant and the ICDBG, Indian Community Development Block Grant. Those two block grants are administered through ONAP under the realm of the NAHASDA legislation that Bill Clinton signed back in 1996. That has been updated about 7 times, maybe more. Um, It's been a while since that one is updated, but since we have it on the screen, let's check and make sure it does take us to the legislation. Should take us directly to NAHASDA. Yep, there it is. Well, it's taking you to NAHASDA under the HUD umbrella, but that's okay. It still describes in detail the legislation, the final rule there. As you're scrolling down, everything's there. Yeah, and all the links are there, and it's an excellent. If you're not familiar with NAHASDA legislation, there's a lot of misconceptions out in Indian country. I hear it all the time. I go and visit a tribe, and they'll say, "We're going to apply for the NAHASDA grant." Well, NAHASDA's not the grant. NAHASDA's the law. It's the legislation. It's the act on which created the opportunity for the Indian Housing Block Grant through the Office of Native American Programs. ONAP is the administrator of the grants, Indian Housing Block Grant for one, under the NAHASDA legislation. So you've got three things. If you're dealing with housing, you really got three sets you've got to be aware, three sets of regulations or legislation. At the top, you have the legislation in the form of NAHASDA. Then underneath that, you've got the Indian Housing Block Grant through ONEP. If you're receiving IHBG, you've got another set of federal regulations in the form of the 24 CFR Part 1000, which is Native American Housing Activities, which is also administered through ONAP, a Department of HUD. Hope this is, for those of you that are familiar with all this, I apologize for the redundancy, but my educated guess is that most of you are not familiar with these logistics of the program. So here on this particular page, we're looking at housing-driven activities with the legislation of NAHASDA, the grants of the Indian Housing Block Program, and then HUD and ONAP as the administrators of that grant program under the NAHASDA legislation. If you're not part of the housing program, you're not receiving housing funds, then this is just for your information. All right, I'll keep going. Here's a little bit more about SAM. Yeah, here is if you're going to sam.gov or using that QR code, it'll take you to the home page, and then you can go to, as it says here on the top right, if you haven't already, register your entity to get a unique entity ID, UEI. That's what I was talking about a moment ago. If you're going to pursue any type of federal grant, you need that UEI. Every entity needs to have, and it's one and done. It's one alphanumeric number, not like you reapply every year or you have multiple UEI numbers. You have one for every legitimate organization that wants to pursue federal funding. So that is through sam.gov. Okay. This one that you see in front of you in the QR code top right is homegrown. This is something that I did. And it is a resource that is available to you if you wish. It's a Word, well, actually, it's a PDF these days that you have access to. We can send it to you, or Brooke can send it to you. As you can see at the very top, it says 2024 updates to OMB's uniform guidance, 2 CFR Part 200, super circular, and where it's from. And at the bottom, at the top, but right above the yellow horizontal line, it says final version, April 4th, 2024. That's when OMB released the new regulations of the federal regulations to the uniform guidance. Now, this is kind of a recap. This is a screenshot you're looking at, but it's several pages. It's 6 or 7 pages. And it's a recap of all the different areas within the uniform guidance by what we're going to do, A, B, C, D, E, and F. I'm going to walk through, but it's kind of a consolidated or abbreviated version. We can put this in your hands if you wish to and take a look at it. I think it's a useful desktop tool, so to speak. to know that these are the regulations that are being rolled out. Now, let's speak about these regulations and how they are integrated by the different agencies. That process is called codification. When the OMB comes out with updates to the uniform guidance, like what we're talking about, or any regulation, they come out with it in a general form like they have on April 4th, and they give the federal agencies, all of them, a timeline to adopt them into their, or integrate them, or merge or morph them, whatever phrase or word you want to use, into their own agency regulations. That's called the codification process. They have until October, well, September 29th, September 30th, basically, because October 1st is when all these changes or modifications, updates are going to go into effect. Every agency is a little bit different in adopting and integrating these updated regulations into their documents and into their processes. It takes time. It's like Detroit and the car making industry going through a retooling. Every industry, every car maker up there, Chevy and Ford and Chrysler and all of them, if they're retooling for brand new versions of cars that are coming out, it takes them a while to integrate. Imagine, with the new trends coming out with electric vehicles, EVs, and all the retooling that has to be done. Same thing here with the regulations. It takes time for the different agencies.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So sorry. I'm not sure where you lost me there. I was talking about using that. This is a resource that's available to you. We can send it to you. It recaps all the updates. It's my document that I prepared. It's a PDF. We can send it to you. It's kind of changes at a glance, but in this case, the glance is like 5 or 6 pages because there's a lot of detail in it. But it's a whole lot better, I think, than trying to actually absorb all the changes in a 150 page uh, federal regulations. So I have a consolidated version that I can send to you if you wish to have it. Just reach out to Brooke or myself, and we'll make sure you get this recap of the updates to the uniform guidance. All right. And this one, this QR code, if it's not too blurry, hopefully it's not, it should, yeah. When I step back from the screen, it does take me to grants.gov. So I just want to make sure that that QR code is equally workable. Grants.gov, if you're not familiar with grants.gov, that's the federal government's repository of all federal agency grants, right? So if we were doing a grant writing program or not, but if we were, we'd spend a lot of time talking about how to navigate through grants.gov to search for grant opportunities. But if you were to go to grants.gov, you'd see something like this. The screenshot on your left is the home page of grants.gov. For those of you that are not familiar with it, grants.gov this is the home page, and at the top right, there's a way for you to register in grants.gov to receive information on grant opportunities, and I suggest that you do that. Register yourself and create a profile and create what's referred to as filters so that you get grant opportunities sent to your phone or sent to your laptop or desktop on a regular basis, like I do almost daily, on grants that I have filtered down and selected. I haven't selected the grants per se, but I've created a filter that's within my profile that sends me grant opportunities that I think will, work for what I'm trying to do. So I would suggest you do the same. That's at the top right of the home page of grants.gov. You register, create a profile, select the filters, or on the home page, as you can see, there's a little bottom arrow there dropping down to what I refer to as day trading. It's search for grants. You can do that too. You click on that and it would take you to another page that is listed with literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of grant opportunities. And just like creating a profile that I mentioned above, to the right, registering, creating a profile, you want to do the same thing here. You want to use the built-in filters that they have in grants.gov to kind of narrow the field down of opportunities from 1,000 maybe down to 50, something much more realistic, or even less than that if you narrow down the field even more. It depends on the filters you select and the type of grant you're looking for. Then, the screenshot on the right, if you're not familiar, is referred to as the synopsis page. It's a bird's eye view of a grant opportunity. So you create your profile on grants.gov, you get a short list of opportunities. Each one is going to have a link that would take you to the actual grant. The link takes you to what's referred to as the synopsis page. And what you see on the right is just that, a synopsis of the grant opportunity. And if you were able to take a closer look at this on your laptop screen or however you're projecting, it's a little difficult to see uh, the whole thing, but it does give you what you're seeing there, that whole middle section, and then the very section at the bottom that was cut off gives you the pertinent information of each particular grant, kind of at a glance. You can look at it. The column on the far left talks about identification information of the grant, opportunity number, the type of grant that it is, and that's right in the middle. It says grant as opposed to a cooperative agreement. And towards the bottom left there, it talks about an expected number of awards, federal awards, 25. And then underneath that, what's referred to as a CFDA. It's a number that's assigned, another tracking number, identification number. And at the bottom left, that middle block there, blue boxed in area, very important area, it says cost sharing or matching requirement. If you're not familiar with that, a lot of grants these days, more and more of these federal grants, and even on the private sector, are wanting the recipient to contribute some of their assets towards the grant. That's the cost sharing, and it could be anywhere from 5% to 100%. So right here, it's just simply saying, yes, there is a cost share requirement. Now, at the Seminole Tribe of Florida, that would be a red flag. We wouldn't be able to go. This is one of the anecdotal stories I'm sharing with you. We wouldn't be able to go any further at the Seminole Tribe because one of their tribal protocols was not pursuing, unless they were grandfathered in, unless we were already in them, not pursuing new opportunities that had a matching requirement regardless of the percentage, whether it was at the low end or not. It did. If it had a cost share, then it was a no-no, no pursue uh, for the Seminole Tribe. So that was one thing. All right, so that's over on the left side. And let me point something. Let me go back over there and hover there for just a minute. Go back to cost sharing matching requirement as it's spelled out there. One of the small, minuscule changes that OMB came out with was what they refer to as a semantics change. What they did is they no longer used the word matching. So if this synopsis was a little more up to date, it would just say cost share requirement. They don't like the word matching for some reason. So we've got to kind of get that out of our vocabulary, get it out of our head. It's a cost share. No longer will you might see it, but it's fading away. It's just the term they don't like. They thought there was some too much confusion between the phrase cost sharing and the word matching. So they're dropping the word matching from all of their synopsises, all of their notice of funding opportunity. You're going to see that disappear. Just one of those little things. Now, it doesn't affect us on a day to day, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention because it's right in front of me. And okay, over on the right side, we've got some important dates when this grant notice went out, and most importantly, the date kind of in the middle there, expected application due date. Always of the utmost concern for pursuing any type of federal grant. You need to know what the timeline is when this is due. Does your tribe have protocols here too? Do they mandate that you have at least a 6 week turnaround window or a 2 month window or enough time to do it? That particular one is come and gone. It was April 22nd of 2024. And gosh, if I'm right, yeah. And look at that. Just above it, it says estimated post date. This notice was put out April 1st, and it had a what is it? March, April, less than about not even 2 month window turnaround. Posted on April 1st or April 4th, somewhere in there, with a due date of posted on April 1st, due date of April 22nd. February 1st. So you got all of February, all of March, and 3 weeks of April. Is that enough time to do a full-blown narrative and all the support documents, budget, resolution if needed by tribal council? Do you have enough time to do all of those things in that window? That's another thing. Seminole Tribe said, let's look at that window. And if it's not less than 3 months, less than a 90-day window, again, let's not pursue it, along with that cost share requirements. That's the second uh, internal protocol that this tribe has. All right, so we wouldn't even pursue this one because there's just not enough time, and it's a double whammy. It also has a cost share requirement. Okay, below that, a couple other things. At the very bottom right, it talks about total amount of funding. If I'm reading that right, $8.5 million total amount, with the highest amount that any particular applicant could receive at 400,000, and the lowest being, if I'm reading it right, 100,000. They call that the floor, the ceiling and the floor. Okay. Now, here's the third protocol that the Seminoles had, and that was if the grant must be more than a certain dollar amount to pursue it. Here, with the floor amount, minimum amount being 100,000, not a problem. The Seminoles floor amount for all federal grants was $50,000 or less. So that was their third protocol on it. The matching, oh, we can't use that word anymore, sorry. Cost sharing, timeline, and minimum amount. Minimum here award would be 100. It's greater than 50,000. So at least that would be a go and get a green light. But we're stalled. At least from the Seminole standpoint, we would be stalled on this one, but I wanted to share it with you. Now, below that, on the bottom, it says eligibility. That's going to be the list of all the entities that are eligible to receive this particular grant. You need to know who you're competing against, right? It's probably not just other tribes or tribal entities or TDHEs. It might be, as indicated, I know it was cut off, but it might be other organizational entities. It could be local governments, state governments. It could be nonprofit organizations. It could be not only tribal entity, but tribal entities that haven't achieved federal recognition yet. So we've got that in that category. Nonprofits, remember some of these grants, but from OMB that are posted in grants.gov, any organization that can get an EIN number and a UEI identity number are eligible to apply. So it's not just tribes. So you really need to know what you're up against here and get an understanding before you commit anything. Here's just a little more detail on that particular grant, up close and personal. Funding number, the type of grant. That one was the it's expired now, but it was the Social Economic Development Strategies, the SEDS grant for 2024. Came and went. It had an April 22nd due date. It was a grant, not a cooperative agreement. We'll get into that in a minute. It had 25 awards maximum, and that was its CFDA number. And here's a little bit more detail on cost sharing. Yes, we can't call it matching anymore. We had cost sharing. Yes, we know. If we did a deeper dive into the grant, we don't have time to do that. We would find out that it had a sliding scale on cost sharing from 5% to 20%. And you would be able to score higher in the scoring process if the more you contributed, the more assets from the tribe you put towards the total amount of the award. So that was included in there. There's the closing date, and on the left is just regurgitate, so to speak, what we saw before, 8.5 million total, 400 maximum award per applicant, 100,000 eligible applicants, Native American tribes, organizations, nonprofits, et cetera, et cetera. So, and on the right is if we had the time to do a grant analysis, we do a deeper dive here and look at all these different components in the notice of funding. That's what you see in the center, that little nice screenshot. That is the actual notice of funding opportunity, the NOFO of the grant, whatever it is, of 93,612 Native American programs, the SEDS program on the far right, 1 through 13. We do a deeper dive if we have the time. We don't to look at all the different requirements of the notice. But one thing I want to point out to you here, and one heads up I want to give you, it's to our benefit. You really don't have to do anything. The notice of funding opportunity, which is represented on the right, all the different components of it, deadline, eligibility, funding, etc. Usually with these federal grants, these notices of funding availability, not untypical of the SEDS grant, are some 75 or 80 pages long. They're very comprehensive. They're very difficult to read. They're very redundant, repetitive. One of the changes that ONB initiated was trying to make the NOFOs more user-friendly, more reader-friendly. Their concern was that smaller applicants, smaller tribes, smaller nonprofits, smaller entities that could be eligible for this don't have the time and energy and resources to be able to tear apart a notice of funding opportunity and divvy it up between a group of subject matter experts. They don't have the resources to do that. So OMB recognized that, and they made a commitment to try to streamline the NOFO process, the notice of funding availability, these forms, like the screenshot in the middle there, the actual notice, from some 75 pages down to 10, 11, 12, 15 pages. I hope they can do that. I really do. That would make these very complex grant notices much more easy to navigate. It's hard enough being able to apply for these programs without needing, legal help and financial managers in there to try to interpret some of the, the requirements of the grant. They make them unnecessarily complicated. So I really hope they can follow through on that. I mentioned earlier grants and cooperative agreements. There's a difference. On the left, a grant, a federal grant. According to OMB, a federal grant, quote unquote, has minimal involvement of the funding agency. They actually use those words, minimal involvement of the funding agency. In other words, it's more direct relationship between the funder and the funding recipient, as opposed to a cooperative agreement. Cooperative agreements are grants, but they're grants to the next level. And what makes them different from a traditional federal grant is they have what's called substantial involvement of the funding agency. More decision making and more intervention from the funder into your day-to-day operation. And at the bottom is the caveat here, the warning. I should have put it in red. What is substantial involvement? It is not defined in the O&B federal regulations. They talk about the grant, they talk about the cooperative agreement, they give this kind of definition that you see above on the left and the right, but they don't describe substantial involvement. I think because it varies depend upon the agency and the grant and the administrator. Native Learning Center had a cooperative, has had grants, federal grants, and they've had one cooperative agreement that was similar to an active grant back in 2014 and 15. Same name, Indian Housing Block Grant, same structure, but much more involvement in the cooperative agreement with the administrator of the program, which in our case was the ONAP office, Office of Native American Programs. Normally, on the left side of the equation, our normal Indian Housing Block Grant flowed through the ONAP office out of Chicago, which is those of you that have the Indian Housing Block Grant would know that that's the Eastern Woodlands office. They cover all the tribes that receive Indian Housing Block Grant east of the Mississippi. Huge geographical area, but not a whole lot of tribes in that area. But they handle it, and we have still do have a great working relationship with that ONAP office. Now, over on the right side, we have a cooperative agreement, a fraction of the dollar amount, but a cooperative agreement doing the same thing as our normal grant. However, instead of having just Eastern Woodlands ONAP, now we've got all 6 ONAPs across the country involved in it. It's nationwide. And every ONAP office, all 6 of them, from the Pacific Northwest down to Albuquerque, and they're scattered all over the United States. They're kind of the same, but they're all different. They have different people working in those offices that interpret the federal regulations a little differently than the person in the next cubicle, let alone the next person in the next ONAP office 1,000 miles away. Each one of them had a different approach on how much involvement they were going to put in the program. Does it make sense here? It got a little bit confusing when you get different federal agencies, federal departments wanting to have a say in your cooperative agreement in a program that you already have an established track record with an established ONAP, and you got other offices stepping in with different opinions and different. So to make a long story short, that cooperative agreement only lasted that year and a half, 2 year period, and we decided not to pursue it again. Now, in my visits, I've visited many tribes. A lot of them share with me the fact that they've had cooperative agreements from different agencies, and they've been wonderful. And, a great track record, no problem, great communication. That's wonderful. We didn't have that experience. That left a little bit of a bad taste in our mouth collectively. So we said, let's not pursue that again. We don't want to put ourselves in that situation again. And as you can imagine, having all those different ONAPs, as good as they are and helpful as they are, it slowed the process down considerably. Okay, because there were different organizations, kind of the same, but yet different, if you know what I mean. So it slowed the process down, and that was also, a factor that we needed to be concerned of. On the left side, our normal IHBG, that was a well-oiled machine, is to this day, a well-oiled machine, well-oiled machine. On the right, new venture, slow process. So that was a real concern. All right, little bit, unless you folks have questions, I'm going to keep going. We've got about 15 minutes before we take another break, and I want to keep progressing through before we take that break. You should carefully reread your award document. I was just talking about the notice of funding for a proposed award. Now let's assume you've got the award and you've got this beautiful award letter in front of you. That's what we're talking about here. We're making a segue here into grants management. That just a couple warnings, just to make everyone aware. This is a legal binding document. Now, when you get into federal grant awards, award documents, and the subsequent federal regulations that come with it, it's because you have a legally binding document of award of public money. Your agency that's awarding that is going to be looking for what I like to refer to as a return on investment, an ROI. They're going to make sure from an operational standpoint, from a financial standpoint, and from a word are out of my head, not procurement, but compliance standpoint, those three things that you are doing everything and meeting all the rights and obligations and laws and protocols and regulations that you are up to date regulations that you are supposed to. And then the bottom one, only an AOR authorized representative may sign the award document. We didn't talk about that, but along with the UEI, unique entity identifier, every organization has an acronym, has a person that should be identified through through grants.gov as an AOR, which is an acronym for Authorized Organizational Representative. That could be an executive director, could be a program director, it could be a tribal council member, it could be you, it could be anyone within the organization who has been empowered, given the authority, and gone through the motions with grants.gov to get that classification. It's not, you don't take a test to get it, there's no cost, but there is a process to become an authorized representative. That is the person basically who signs the document. And here's a kind of a look at it. And I don't want to hover here too long. I want to start getting into the actual regulations, but this is an award letter, a federal award letter from our Ho-Chunks our friends at Ho-Chunk Nation who graciously allowed us to take a screenshot of their award letter for a healthy community harvest food program. Small screenshot at the back, just normal stuff at the top of the award letter, the dollar amount and contact information, CDFI and CDFA numbers. But what I want to show you, is it on the next slide too? Yeah, this slide and the next one are the most important parts in my opinion, and that is the provisions. These are the terms and conditions. So we're going to soon get into the regulations, right? We're going to get into the uniform guidance. But devil's in the details here. Every agency, when it provides an award document, you need to know what this award document says and take a deep dive here. This one, they call it provisions. It's coming from Department of Agriculture, Food and Agriculture Division. It's similar to a lot of federal award letters, but the provisions are going to be different. And in this particular case, there's 9 here, then it goes on 10, 11, 12, 13, 13 plus different requirements that may match up with the federal regulations or may be more restrictive. And folks, this is where a lot of recipients, tribes included, drop the ball. They don't pay attention to some of these specific provisions that might be more restrictive. So let's just look at the first one there. It says, if you can't read it, I'll read it for you. This award incorporates the following. This is part of the provisions on the actual award document. This is real. It says funds in the amount of $214,000 are withheld pending receipt of the AOR, the authorized representative signature on the award letter. If you were to scroll down, you see where that is. Signature certifies recipient understands the responsibilities in maintaining all matching fund documents must be available upon request for audit purposes. Well, okay, we got a paper trail here, an electronic trail for our audit coming up at some point down the road. So there's a little heads up, making sure you're keeping track of all this. Middle of that paragraph, signature also acknowledges responsibility in ensuring matching, they use the word matching. You can tell this is about a year or so. they meant cost share. Requirements are met per the requirement standards stated in 2 CFR Part 100, 200, 306, which we'll get to. All right, very specific reference to a federal regulation in Part C. Yeah, we'll get there. Return the sign award document to the awards, and then you're supposed to sign it, send it back. And then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, very more specific regulations. 9, if we go to the next page here, 10, 11, 12, and 13, several things. All right, number 11 there talks about 100% matching. Whoa, 100% cost share. So if they got a $214,000 award, as it said back in number 1, that means their cost share, aka match, was also 214,000. And if we were going to go back and look at that actual award letter, that small screenshot, it would show that 214, 214, 400 and what, 28,000 total. So 100% match. All matching must directly benefit and be specifically identifiable with approved project budgets. Okay, it's got to be related to the budget in every way, shape, or form, line item by line item. Awardee is required to maintain complete, accurate, up-to-date records. We're going to talk about record retention to support all matching activities under the award. Yes, matching requirements may not be satisfied with federal funds or property or services provided under another federal award. Cannot, for example, cannot use any of the proceeds from the Indian Housing Block Grant to support this matching requirement of 100%. Can't use a dollar of Indian Housing Block Grant as a match. You cannot leverage federal monies. Usually, you cannot leverage a dollar of one federal grant to offset a cost of another. That's a big no-no. All right. Grantee must report cost sharing annually on their quarterly financial report, standard form 425, which is a typical normal standard form for reporting award dollars and award expenditures on a quarterly basis. Financial form 5. Okay, and more there. And at the bottom, what do we got? Award incorporates the following. The fact sheet, $72,000 remain without some more particulars there. So I just wanted to point that out. This whole thing, this award, terms and conditions of the award sometimes supersede the protocols of the tribe, supersede your own internal controls, and probably supersede the requirements of the uniform guidance. Got me? We're looking at regulations that are more stringent and might be buried in the award letter. So from a compliance standpoint, you really need to pay attention to this and where we're going next. Internal control, I mentioned it a couple times now, internal controls and monitoring. Yes, this is just a screenshot back to the Code of Federal Regulations, but to a specific citation, and we're going to get there. 2 CFR Part 200, 303. It's called, if you can see this on your screen, internal controls. And let me talk just a little bit about this before we go to a break. All right. This is this citation within the uniform guidance is, in my opinion, one of the most important citations in the whole uniform guidance, all of A, B, C, D, E, and F, the whole thing. What it says in those 5 little bullet things that you see in the middle of the screen is that every recipient of federal funds must have certain internal controls in place to be able to receive it and to maintain control of it. This is what the auditors are going to look for, and the program reviewers, they are going to look at your internal controls in the form of your policies and procedures. Now, this particular citation here kind of sets the stage, in my opinion, for the whole interpretation of all the federal regulations. This is critical. It's probably one of the shortest. Look, it's got hardly, if it has 100 words there, that's all it has on 5 different paragraphs. There's not much there. Here's a perfect example of an important citation that's vague. For the most part, what it says, let's look at, I'll break these down real quick, A, B, C, D, and E. There's only 5 of them listed here, and I can interpret them for you. A says you must establish and maintain effective internal control over your federal award that provides, and I want you to write this phrase down or circle it or highlight it, reasonable assurance. That phrase, reasonable assurance, is peppered throughout the regulations. What does it mean? To me, it means to the best of our ability, quote unquote. Reasonable assurance. And so that phrase is a phrase that I would use in my internal controls and my policies and procedures. With reasonable assurance, we are going to have this policy that pertains to A, B, and C. Okay, let me continue. Provides reasonable assurance that the non-federal entity, that's us, the recipients of federal funds, are maintaining the federal award in compliance with statutes, regulations, terms and conditions of the federal award. Second major thing there, these internal controls should be in compliance with the guidance of the what's referred to as the Green Book, the standards for internal control of the federal government. If you want to take a deep dive and look and see where, for all federal agencies, the Green Book is the internal control document for the agencies, where internal controls came from back in the day. So if you want some external reading at night, you want to take a deeper dive and read about where did internal controls come from in the first place? Go to the Green Book. You can literally Google Green Book of internal controls and you'll come up with that document that was done about, what, 10 years ago. And it's the controls that the agencies must use to put in place. Those federal controls now have trickled down in regulations to us. So the first paragraph, the first sentence says, we've got to have internal controls so that we're not breaking any laws or protocols or regulations. Okay, that's what it says in part 1. Doesn't tell you how to do it. It just says, don't break any laws with your internal controls. Second thing it says is, it must comply with the Constitution and federal statutes, regulations, terms, and conditions. Okay. It's kind of says the same thing that paragraph A says. C, you must evaluate and monitor. I would like you to write that down too. Evaluate and monitor. That's the self-monitoring. So we know we've got to have internal controls in the form of policies and procedures, and we've got to self-monitor ourselves, probably in a written format. You've got to have policies and procedures, yes. Internal controls, yes, that's the umbrella. And you've got the document that you review and evaluate your policies and procedures and your internal controls on a regular basis. Every agency is going to be a little different. HUD on its IHBG says you got to do it once a year. Hopefully you do it more than once a year. All right, let's continue on. D, take action. Take action when instances of non-compliance are identified during your monitoring process. Take action to resolve them. So that reinforces the self-monitoring. You got to have internal controls. You got to do the self-monitoring on a regular basis. And when you find discrepancies, you've got to change them. You've got to fix them and show that you fixed them. Document the fact. So you got to evaluate, monitor and evaluate. It's mandatory. It's built in here. And the last one is relatively new. I refer to it as PII, personally identifiable information. You must identify and have internal controls and policies and procedures that protect what's referred to as personally identifiable information, which is going to be different for each and every one of you depending upon the type of program you run. For Native Learning Center, we don't deal with housing per se. we have instructors. So their information about those subject matter experts and those instructors is personally identifiable information. If you're running a housing program and you have tribal members applying for rental or for home ownership, you probably have a slew of different personally identifiable pieces of information on every person. Social security number, income, family size, gender, marital status. Um, if they have a passport, their passport number, their education and their transcript, all of those are personal driver's license. All of those are personally identifiable information. You've got to know what they are. You've got to identify them, and then because it's incorporated into the internal controls, you've got to have policies and procedures that protect that information with limited access by certain people. Does this make sense? So if you have paper, you're just doing a paper system, and people are filling out forms, you probably need to identify what those forms are, the type of information your tribal members are providing or whomever, and they literally would have to be stored in a lockbox or a lock filing cabinet with limited access. Who can access it? Now we're also at the same time transitioning to electronic records, right? That is becoming more and more of a focus. The federal government is requiring agencies to move in that direction. Those federal agencies are putting pressure on us to move in that direction. So we're moving more towards electronic records or a dual system. Now, on the electronic side, you have the same requirement, but we have electronic files that probably need to be segregated into a separate drive, if you have such a thing on your mainframe system that has limited access by only a few people that can go in, and even less people that can go in and have access and make changes. You know where I'm going with this? You need to have some conversations with your IT department to create protected systems, so your electronic records are stored and protected, they're identified, maintained, etc. And if you've got a dual system like we did at the Native Learning Center, you got to do both. But the feds are moving into the direction of electronic. They're following the medical industry and the hotel industry that move to electronic medical records and electronic record keeping. Both of those industries have done a good job making that transition. Now we have to do it. And our regulations are enforcing that more and more. Okay, we talked about internal controls. Okay, top of the hour, couple minutes past. Let's take another break, if you don't mind. Take 5 minutes, reconvene at 7 minutes after the hour. So for me, 3:07 Eastern Time, 2:07, etc. So let's come back in just a few minutes, okay? All right, let's get back into it. Um, I'm gonna jump through the next couple slides real quick so we can start getting into the regulation, the citations themselves. One of the important things, this is a burning issue on a national level. OMB is coming down hard on the agencies, and on the auditor guidelines, uh, because of what's happening not only in the United state by state, but on a national level and on a global level. And that is the burning one these days is cybersecurity. Every week that goes by, we hear about all these big organizations that are being hacked into and malware and all things. Well, the federal OMB has recognized that as well. They're dealing with that on a federal level as well. And they're passing more restrictions on to the agencies, and the agencies are passing them on to us. And also, what we're going to see is a ramping up of these requirements, more scrutiny when our programs are audited because of risk. They are very concerned. All the agencies are being monitored by OMB to mitigate their risk factors, and the agencies in turn are putting more pressure on us minimize our risk as well as recipients. So you're going to see more and more regulations tightening up, more things about security, risk mitigation, low risk, high risk. We'll talk about that when we talk about audits. And what was the other one? Data, data fund. We're moving more and more towards data gathering and data performance as part of the mitigating of the risk factor. So I just want to, we're seeing those kind of requirements ramp up. I'm going to move through budgets quickly. Just, I'm not even really going to go there. I do want to talk about record keeping very quickly. Now, when we get into the regulations, and actually giving you a little sneak peek here, one of the regulations we'll talk about later this today is in section subpart C, and that is 334, retention of records. It's one that I personally have a problem with, and one that I think we need to do a little bit better. The federal guidelines say, and this is verbatim, financial records, support documents, statistical records, and all other non-federal entity record pertinent to your federal award must be retained for a period of 3 years from the date of the final, your closing. 3 years. Now, the IRS requires us with our personal tax return and tax information at 7 years. So my thought is, even though you can meet the letter of the law by retaining your records for 3 years, I really don't think you do your programs any justice by having that short period of time, especially if we're moving more and more towards electronic record keeping. We want more retainage, longer retainage. And if you're anything like we were at the Native Learning Center, from time to time, we would get questions from different authorities coming in saying, hey, can you go back in your records back to 2008, 2009, 2010? That's much more than 3 years. And can you tell us this or that? We keep those records now that they're 100% electronic. We keep them indefinitely. A little harder to do with paper copy. Another reason why the agencies are having us move over to electronic record keeping, longer requirements. So your internal controls, your policies and procedures could say something to the effect of, we recognize the fact that the federal regulations say 3 year retainage, but we're going to use a longer period with our records of our programs, more like either 7 or 10 or 15 or even indefinitely in perpetuity, as long as the department stays viable. And even after its potential closure, we're keeping those electronic records way beyond the 3 year requirement. So I wanted to show you that one. We talked about this one. This is also in subpart C, which we'll get to. Monitoring and report program performance. Monitoring yourself, the non-federal entity, that's what they call us, NFEs. Non-federal entity is responsible, we saw that back in 303, for oversight of operations of the award. You must, second paragraph, you must monitor your activities to be in compliance with all up-to-date regulations, etc., terms and conditions. Bottom one, report program performance. Federal awarding agency must use off ONB's approved common information collection. We're going to get into that. Subparts B and C of the uniform guidance of those federal regulations pretty much pertain to the agencies. But it's imperative to be able to understand what the federal agencies are being told to do, because they're passing that on to us. Why do and you got to ask yourself from time to time, why do we got to do this? Why do we keep 3 years? Why are we moving to digital? Why do we have some of these regulations? Well, the regulations in subpart B and C help explain that, because we'll be able to see the marching orders that the federal agencies have and why those things are passed on to us. It'll hopefully make open the door, make more sense. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. We talked about records and reporting now, and I'm going to kind of jump over a little bit adjustments, extensions, and closeouts, because it's not really pertaining to here's where I really want to go. Talk a little bit about regulatory and compliance before we get into anything. Oops. Here, kind of a visual picture of what I was talking about before. Picture what we're talking about here is a pyramid. At the top of the pyramid, we've got the law, we've got the legislation, the statutes, like NAHASDA, like Davis-Bacon, and some of the other regulations. Underneath that, we've got the OMB federal regulations. We've got the 2 CFR Part 200. They're the same thing. That I'm referring to the same document. Super circular. Okay. Then underneath that, we've got agency requirements. As I mentioned, HUD had its 24 CFR Part 1000, Native American housing activities. That's a set of federal regulations specifically required at the agency level. So if you're receiving Indian Housing Block Grant funds through ONEP, then you've got abide by not only the federal regulations of 2 CFR Part 200, but those second set of regulations. We've got a lot of bosses, don't we? All right, so we have those I don't want to use the word protocol, but those federal regulations at the agency level. I'm at the third tier there. Program guidelines. We've got agency directives from time to time that come out, and we have our own tribal protocols. No matching, no less than $25,000. We've got those kind of protocols. And then at the very bottom of the pyramid, holding this whole thing up, we've got your internal controls. You are the recipient of the federal funds. You've got to have internal controls, specifically in the form of numerous policies and procedures that are up to date. And you've got other practices in there that fall into that as well, such as GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. You've got best practices. You've got anecdotal things. You've got, rule of thumb type of stuff. Those are all best practices type things. And that's what holds up the whole organization, your internal controls. So again, it kind of behooves you to make sure you understand all the requirements. Questions? Yeah, I know you've been kind of putting them out there as we go. Well, let's continue. Let's continue into part 2, take our remaining time that we have here and get in to, now that we set the stage, go through as much as possible. If I can't get it all, we'll carry it over to tomorrow, but go through the first part of the actual citations, the statutory requirements, and then subpart A, B, and C. All right, and you'll see what I talked about a couple of these in advance, but can awarded federal grant budget be formatted to a funding recipient's accounting system? Can an awarded federal grant budget be formatted to your own tribal funding recipient's accounting system, for example? No, just like cutting off the tag on a new bed mattress, you will certainly go to prison for this violation. No, the federal award budget cannot be manipulated to fit a funding recipient's budget format. Yes, option 3, among other reasons, the federal award budget can be manipulated to fit a funding recipient's specific account format, especially if you have accounts, book of accounts or accounts that just don't quite match up with the federal government, or none of the above. Well, obviously I kind of gave the answer away there. Yes, you can. You can take the federal award and kind of manipulate it in a way that fits your budget, as long as you're not changing the bottom line or drastically changing line item amounts. Yes, you can do that. Okay, let's keep going here and take our remaining time and look at bottom left, part 2, highlights of the uniform guidance. Let's get into that. About 5 or 6 statutory requirements that are seldom talked about because they're not really prevalent. You can't find these. I have them. And we're going to talk about them, each one of them. Some of them are pretty common sense, straightforward. Some of them are panic driven. Interesting, though. First one, supporting the implementation of the President's Management Agenda. That's what it's called. Support for domestic preferences for procurement. It's not mandatory. You can see it says the first bullet, the purchase, and use of products and materials produced in the United States is encouraged. Buy America, buy USA. That's really what it is here, with the exception of some things that they're driving a point. It says 2 CFR Part 200, 322, that's in Subpart C. We haven't got there yet, but there's a specific citation in there that says, be careful of manufactured products such as iron, aluminum, steel, and cement, just about everything home builders use, and infrastructure, construction, they use it. Also, construction materials, specific construction materials, PVC pipe, plastic polymer-based products, aka PVC pipes, concrete aggregates such as gravel, sand, crushed rock, glass in the form of fiber optics, and lumber. They specifically want you to and encourage you to buy domestic when it comes to these particular construction materials or manufactured products. Okay. So I want you to be aware of this, that it's not a moratorium. Well, that a moratorium is a banning of something. We'll get to that in a minute. This is more of an encouragement to buy domestic specifically for these products. I want you to be aware of this. This is of particular concern with tribes that are up at the Canadian border, like our friends at St. Regis Mohawk, Akwesasne, who are half in upstate New York, half in Canada. There's might be an issue here for them, along with some other things. So that's the first one, domestic preference for procurement, kind of an underlying. That came from the Trump administration, although Buy America has been around for years and years, but they kind of put an executive order to drive the fact. Number two, standardization and terminology implementation of state. This is an agency directive, so I'm not going to dwell on this. This is stuff that they have to do. This one, and this is also an agency directive, improving government-wide approach to performance and risk. I mentioned risk a moment ago. OMB is emphasizing the importance of performance to achieve results for the agencies. They want the agencies to step up and be able to provide more data information. So what are the agencies doing? They're taking this requirement that they have and putting it into our requirements. More data, more program planning and design, including goals and objectives. We're going to see that more and more moving towards data performance. It's there, it's coming. Emphasis on machine readable format. Okay, another agency emphasis to clean things up and again move towards data, specifically 335, which is an agency directive. Methods for collection, transmission, and storage of information. Encourage recipients to use recipients, in this case, you're talking the agencies, to use more and more machine readable formats rather than closed formats or paper. Again, agencies get away from paper and move towards data performance electronically. That is having a trickle-down effect to us. We're moving in that direction more and more. Again, here it is again. 5, here's a moratorium. This is, and I have to be honest, this is a Trump administration panic mode carryover. I'm surprised that it's still on the books, but it is in the regulations, a banning of certain, you can see at the bottom there, Chinese companies for the purchase of audio visual equipment or telecommunication equipment, including low voltage cabling or service agreements for your telecommunication equipment, your AV equipment, and any surveillance equipment or service contracts you have. Those companies at the bottom that are all Chinese companies are specifically banned and named by name in the federal regulations, believe it or not, by name. You hear that thunder? Oh my gosh, it's raining to beat the band here. I'm in South Florida. This is an everyday occurrence. Bear with me. I'm hoping, knocking on wood, I don't lose power. Bear with me. We're moving along real nice here. Okay, this is a banning. This is one of Trump executive order carried over, a banning. We all have surveillance equipment that we use to protect our assets and our employees, our people, our equipment. We all have telecommunication systems. We all have AV equipment. We're using it right now to some extent, but we got, normally not a problem. Following your norm procurement protocols, not a problem. These Chinese companies, just so you know, I know you would never go there, but just so you know. Here's another one that came from the Trump administration that makes no sense at all, but it's in the books. Never contract with the enemy. Well, first of all, we were told in the very first one to buy domestic, weren't we? Buy domestic, okay? Buy American. So it's like, why is this here? I don't know, but it's here, and I want you to be aware of it. Do not spend any of your federal funds buying anything from an enemy of the United States. Don't you ever. How rude of you to do that. Don't ever buy anything from an enemy of the United States or any country that we're in conflict with. Now, we are not in conflict with Canada or Mexico, so you're good to go there, but we are told we're supposed to use our federal funds for domestic purchases only, domestic procurement. So it's, again, I don't know why it's here when we can only use our federal funds for domestic purchases to start with. So, but it's here. And I'm surprised it's still here, but it is here. Okay. All procurement, I think this is the last one. All procurement must comply with internal controls. We talked about this, and your internal procurement standards to ensure the following. They're very much concerned about this, and I want to point out one in particular. First one, every purchase complies with your internal controls, specifically with your policies and procedures. Okay. First check mark. Every purchase is reasonable, necessary, allowable, and allocable. Write those 4 words down. Reasonable purchase, unnecessary purchase or procurement. It must be allowable according to the federal regulations, and it must be allocable. Where do we go to get more information on that? We go to section D and we go to section E. That's going to be tomorrow, about the definition of each one of those 4 very important compliance words: reasonable, necessary, allowable, and allocable to a budget line item. Okay. With your procurement, second check mark. With your procurement, there is open competition. You always want to showcase that. Make sure this is not a closed environment, that it is not discriminatory in any way, shape, or form, especially with sealed bid process. Conflict of interest does not exist. And the last one, most important one, in my opinion, there is documentation on the procurement or the purchase of every single item. Excuse me, in my opinion, regardless of cost. And it's right here. It's right in black and white there. There is procurement, there is a paper trail or electronic trail for every single purpose. This is a compliance. One of the 10 commandments of compliance is that there is a paper trail, either or both in some cases, but you documented every purchase, whether you use POs or not. All the signatures are there, all the approvals are there, all the protocols have been met. So documentation for every purchase. I'm saying that because we're going to get to a section here, if not in the next few minutes, definitely tomorrow when we get into Subpart D about procurement itself. Okay, so let's keep going. Unless you have questions, I'm going to keep going because I want to move through Subpart A, B, and at least get us up to Subpart C. All right, Subpart A of the Uniform Guidance of the Regulations. It's all definitions. This is an area that you might pass over normally. Do not do that. Do not ever do that. You need to know the words, the phrases, and the definitions that the federal government uses that apply to us. And let's just walk through it real quick. Some of them are inconsequential, some of them are important. And I have them circled or identified in red. Audit. First one means a financial and operational or operational inspection of you. Now, the current threshold to qualify for what's referred to as a single audit is 750,000. So if receiving 750,000 of federal funds, you've tripped the trigger to be eligible for a federal, what's called a single audit. Now they're talking about increasing that, or it's been approved to increase it to 1 million. That's one of the changes to the federal regulation. So I want you to audit that or circle this one. This one's very important. More details on it. You see at the bottom, it says single audit conducted in accordance with 2 CFR Part 200 514. We'll get to that tomorrow afternoon. Scope of audit. So mark that one. Audit finding. Hopefully you'll never have an audit finding. More specifics on 200-516, tomorrow's talk. Auditee, that's you. Auditor, that's the team that comes in. We know what a budget and a budget period is. Capital assets, those are asset, but below that, computing devices. And I have this boxed in because I want you to be aware that now computing devices, there was a time when our smartphones, our software systems, calculators, those are all computing devices that calculate, that even store information like our smartphones. They used to be referred to as equipment. Now there's been changes to the threshold of, and I want you to mark this on, so not so much computing devices, but supplies and equipment. The threshold has increased from 5,000, as you can see at the bottom there, to 10,000. So that would include computing devices, of course, like smartphones, but just in general, supplies, what used to be considered equipment because of its dollar value might now be considered a supply with a lot easier to reconcile. You don't have depreciated assets depreciation to worry about. So I want you to mark that one down. Increase in the threshold of equipment and supplies from 5,000 to 10,000. We talked about the audit going up, nothing. Corrective action plan, I hope you never have to, a corrective action plan only happens when there's an audit finding that can't be resolved. And hopefully, if we're doing our job right, we never have to do a corrective action. A corrective action, here it is again on this page. Something I hope you never do. There's the cost sharing thing I talked about, also known as matching, which I've crossed out. It doesn't exist anymore. That's more of a semantics type of thing, but it's still a change. Here's equipment, means tangible property. Now they've increased what was right, used to be 5,000, that has increased to 10,000. I want you to circle that. They also have a separation between what they consider general and specialty equipment. Specialty equipment typically is hospital oriented, x-ray machines, microscopes, things like that. Okay, nothing unusual here. Information technology systems. Now it can be, they didn't recognize that in the past. Now they do as a tangible, you can put a value on it. Intangible property is something that's new and added. We can put a value on intangible property. I'm sure glad we can, because the Native Learning Center deals with curriculum and training, curriculum development, and you could put a value on curriculum. That's intangible property. So yeah, that's a real thing. We talked about internal controls back in the beginning. We'll talk about it again. There's that phrase, reasonable assurance, which means to the best of my ability, to the best of our collective ability. And the bullets again, it means internal controls, compliance with applicable regulations and laws, reliability of reporting. Compliance is all about consistency and repetition and reliability and effectiveness. And then down below, we'll get into in section C, procurement methods. There's been some subtle, nothing major in here, but there's been a couple small changes well, one in particular in the sealed bid process that I want to share with you, and it's to our advantage as tribal entities. I'll get to that. Here's one. Now, this is Vince Franco's soapbox, just my opinion. More on this later, but there are two definitions of procurement. One is called informal and one is called formal. The informal includes these two categories, what they call micro purchase and the small purchase. And there might be some tribes, there might be some folks in the audience that have this. They use the micro purchase. It used to be 10,000 or less would be considered a micro purchase or micro procurement. Now they've increased that to $50,000, and the small purchase follows suit. It goes up to 250,000. And what they say in this informal procurement process, or the way the federal government looks at it, is they consider these to be optional for recipients. You can use a micro purchase or a small purchase. I personally don't recommend that because we've learned a couple slides ago, look at the bottom right of the screen, there is supposed to be documentation of every purchase. Micro purchase says you do not have to have documentation of procurement if it's less than 10,000, or now, these days, up to 50,000. That, my friends, I think would be the kiss of death, to not have procurement paperwork, to not have documentation following your procurement. Same thing with the small purchase. It says limited paperwork. No, not a good idea, in my humble opinion. I would rather follow what the uniform guidance says, the traditional formal procurement methods. There's three of them. Sealed bid being one of them, and proposals or RFPs, actually four, if you look at it this way, RFPs or proposals. Competitive, we'll get into this in Subpart C, so don't worry, I'm moving through them very quickly. Competitive, and then lastly, what they call non-competitive, or often is referred to as sole source, one provider that provides a good or service. Those are the four traditional, the OGs, so to speak, the original traditional methods of procurement: sealed bid, RFP, competitive, and non-competitive, aka sole source. So I just want to point that out and make a distinction between informal, the micro purchase, small purchase. Why do they have that? Why do they have that informal? Gotta be, why is it there, Vic? Why do they have that? I'll tell you why they have it. Because the uniform guidance, the regulations, and federal awards in general are not just, as we've learned, not just for Indian tribes, not or tribal entities, or colleges or universities, hospitals or nonprofits. They are also for departments of the federal government, such as the United States military. They don't receive 10,000, 100,000, or even 100 million. They receive $100 billion in federal funds. So to them, to the department, to the Marines, the department, let's look at the Army, for example, or any of the branches of the U.S. military, 250,000, let alone 10,000. That's such a tiny amount for them. Even a million or 10 million might be considered small for them when they're buying aircraft carriers that cost $30 billion. That's why though that informal procurement is included in the regulations. And we're going to learn as we go through here, just because the federal regulations say it's okay to do it, doesn't mean we should do it. It doesn't mean we're obligated to do it. And let me go back. This is just one example where I think we don't do it. Just my opinion. We didn't do it at the Native Learning Center. The Seminole Tribe doesn't follow this informal procurement. I'm not saying it's wrong. I know some tribes follow it. I'm just saying it goes against the overlying principle of federal regulations, as it says in the bottom right, document every purchase. So how are you going to explain that to your auditors coming in, saying, show me your policies and procedures, show me your procurements. Why don't you have procurement or documentation for these small dollar purchases? Well, we're using the informal procurement process. Don't do that. You want documentation for every purchase so you can prove beyond reasonable doubt that you have uh, a paper trail. You've got documentation for everything. If you're ever challenged, you can show. So you don't want gaps in your documentation ever. We talked about PII, personally identifiable information. The big one that's growing, if you fly as much as I do, you go through airports, biometrics is becoming more and more prevalent, either old school fingerprint or now it's the eye and the retina and the face scanning. The airports use them. I know Delta, I fly Delta a lot. They use it. They have what's called the Clear system, which is a biometric scan of my eye that allows me to walk through TSA security, just walk through basically. Uh, and with them not doing anything. I don't have to do anything, pretty much just walking through. But this is becoming more and more prevalent. It's also within the bigger realm of what's the artificial intelligence. That all fits in here. And this is a concern. This is a growing concern. The protection of this electronic and AI information. How are we going to protect this and show the auditors and program reviewers that we got a handle on this? We know biometrics is a concern. It does include personally identifiable information, and we do have mechanisms to protect it. Even on a simpler level, I know the Seminole tribe has the Chronos system, which is the fingerprint 4 or 5 digit employee number system. It's just a machine mounted on a wall. Um, you put in your 4 or 5 digit employee number, it scans your fingerprint, and it's got all your human resource information that comes up on the screen, right there in front of you. That's where you request your time off, your vacation time, your sick time, etc. And that's where you go to check on all those aggregates. It's more sophisticated now with the biometrics, even more sophisticated. So this is another growth area, another area we need to be aware of. Okay, here's the supplies we talked about. 5,000 threshold going to 10,000. Okay. All right, gonna skip the quiz because they're kind of goofy. But I want to go into Subpart B and finish with our time in Subpart C as much as we can get. Subpart B of the federal regulations is referred to as the general provisions. It pertains almost exclusively to the agencies, not to us as the funding recipients. We just went through Subpart A with its definitions. I mean, we learned something there. They're not regulations per se, they're definitions, but B, we get into what the agency has to do. So let me stream through here and see if there's anything that jumps out other than normal business, any regulations that they have to do that trickles down to us. And I'll point that out. Oops. 1 second, my friends. 1 second. Okay, very good. I got it, people. Got a comment, and I understand completely. My sincere apologies about political parties. Not what I intended to do. All I was observation was that those regulations came over from a certain administration, good or bad. We got to deal with them. Those are regulations that are real that we have to deal with. And thank you, whoever sent that. I did get that notice, and I will be very careful moving forward. Thank you for the heads up. Okay, keep going on the regulations. Establishing uniform administrative requirements. Yes, these are things the agency has to do. Here, of applicability, what awards they're talking about, basically all awards. All of the subparts we're talking about, A, B, C, D, E, and F, and the appendix 1 and 2 pertain to all the awards, all the grants, and all the cooperative agreements. So agencies have to deal with that as well. Okay, exceptions, there are no exceptions to the audit requirements. If you receive enough money under the threshold, you would have to get that, have that audit taken care of. Okay, this one doesn't pertain to us, authorities, superset, we're not gonna get into that. Here we go. These are the citations that were consolidated into the super circular from back in the day. The old, if you ever see any of these, A87, A89, 102, 110, 122, 133, these are the old citations. If you come across that, you know you're looking at a very, very, very old regulation. Hopefully, the agencies that are providing the funding do not reference any of these, and they're using 2 CFR Part 200, the most recent version of it. But if you do see these, you'll know it's older regulations. Okay, nothing of particular interest here. Agency implementation, again, these are agency requirements, O&B responsibilities. We'll review the federal agency regulations contained in 2 CFR and provide interpretation of those citations to ensure effective, efficient implementation. What they're saying here is O&B, Office of Management and Budget, is responsible for the agencies. And then the agencies, of course, take that information and pass it down to us. Okay, nothing exceptional here. Okay, that's it. That was subpart B. So the few minutes we have, I want to go into C. Now in the federal regulations in subpart C, starting particularly with subpart C, we transition. Some of it is agency driven, some of it pertains to us. So let's take the few minutes we have remaining here. If it's okay with you, I'm just going to kind of go until we're done here, not break like we did, take the 5-minute break. I have 15 minutes to the top of the hour. I'm just going to go until we're done because this is the part I want to end with. We'll either find a break here and carry over to tomorrow, or maybe we'll get through the whole thing. But we'll go until we're done if that's okay. All right, 200, perfect. So we're in subpart C of the uniform guidance. Pre-award, that's the name of the subpart section, pre-award requirements. 200 purpose states that instructions of pre-award matters used by the agency. Okay. 201, use of grant agreements. Yes. For the agency to us, we're going to use grant agreements. Program planning, more and more here, it's saying, we've got a little highlight section here, states that the agency must design a program and create information of the funding opportunity. Here's where it says encourage recipients to engage members in the community. Second bullet underscores the agency consider all available data. Here we got this data and evaluation results. Again, we're moving more toward agencies, again, are being pushed more towards that. Public notice is their thing. Here's the one I was referring to before. Notice of funding opportunity states that competitive grants and cooperative agreements, the federal agency must announce specific opportunities. Yes, and over in the box, some of the highlights of the revision to this particular citation. One of them is encouraging, it should say plain, it says plain language NOFOs. In other words, they're trying to streamline the NOFOs, as I was mentioning before, to make them more user friendly. Because of the, there it is, focus on underserved communities and that applicants are not unintentionally excluded from the funding opportunities. That's their focus. So they're trying to make those notices of funding more user friendly, more reader friendly. Okay, 204 again, 208, specific conditions. Here's one that could apply to us. Federal awarding agency may impose additional specific award conditions. That's a very nice way of saying penalties based on the risk posed by us, the applicants of the federal funds, right? When the applicant or recipient has a history of failure or audit findings or poor performance reviews to comply with specific general or specific terms and conditions of the award, there are what they refer to as remedies for non-compliance. We'll get to that down a little bit farther. Uh, those remedies, that sounds very nice, but the remedies are not. They're like such things as uh, banishment from being and not being able to receive funding, to penalties, to civil court. There's all kinds of things that the federal agency can do if we intentionally do not comply with the regulations, or we have finding after finding after finding. So there are certain remedies they call for non-compliance. Federal 209, federal agency, that each federal auditing agency is authorized to require us to submit, if necessary, certification and representation on an annual basis. If they want information, they can go after us to get more information. Information contained in the federal award states that the agency must include performance goals, indicators, targets, and baseline data. Okay, here's one where now it's not really clearly defined, but here's one where the agency, we're going to see this trickle down to us, where the agency's getting marching orders that are becoming more and more clear that we're moving towards performance-based everything. And this is going to trickle down into uh, citations for us at some point. Data driven performance goals based on data, more and more of that, and based on that's the trend that we're going, and we're starting to see that more and more with the agency reports that they want from us to do on a quarterly, semi-annual, and annual basis. They're more and more data driven, aren't they? With the Indian Housing Block Grant, it moved from a paper document to an Excel sheet. Now everything's done online. It was, I can't think, Epic, and now it's the GEMS program. So all online systems, more and more data focused. And here's why, because the agencies are getting that that initiative coming down from OMB. Reporting a determination if he is not qualified for a federal award. This is all through sam.gov. They can do that. Suspension and debarment. Here's one of those I was talking a moment ago about what they can do for non-compliance here. You might want to take a look at what they mean by suspension and debarment. They're not talking about vendors here that you would potentially have to screen before you before you purchase from. They're talking about you as the recipient. Suspension and debarment states that the non-federal entity, that's you, is subject to the non-procurement debarment and suspension regulations in accordance with new executive order. And I have a little screenshot there. You may want to write this down. Executive order 112-549. There's a little screenshot there. Executive order 12549 it talks about agencies shall participate in government-wide system for non-procurement debarment and suspension. Person who is debarred or suspended shall be excluded from federal financial and non-financial assistance under the federal program. Debarment, suspension of a participant in a program. And by participant, they're not talking about a person. They're talking about an entity. They're talking about you and me representing our organization. Okay. There's that never contract with the enemy. That one's there. We talked about that one. We talked about this one, the prohibition on telecommunication. Those were two executive orders that turned into actual citations. 215 and 216 are now real citations. They went from executive order to a statutory requirement now, also a actual citation. This is a brand new one. Now, those of us of a certain age probably remember back in year 2000, 2001, 2002, the Enron situation, that financial institution based out of New York City and worldwide that was destroying financial records, conducting a Ponzi scheme. Certain leaders in that organization ended up, I think some of them went to prison. New legislation came out of that whole scenario in the Sarbanes-Oxley legislation, non-destroying of financial records and whistleblower protection. Because there were some whistleblowers in that situation and they were persecuted by the company. And what is trickled down from all that is now new regulations, and this is a brand new one. Whistleblower protection is a new citation that will address protections and requirements for non-federal entities like us. It's a brand new section, whistleblower protection. So mark that one down. That's new, whistleblower. Hopefully you're not in that situation. And we talked about, I think I showed this as a resource early on. This was the recap. I have a recap of the update in a PDF format. The updates are consolidated I said it was 5 or 6 pages, which we can send to you if you wish. We have that. And I think we're doing pretty good. We actually come up to the top of the hour here. And I'm about to turn this back over to Brooke to close out. But just before I do that, just a little recap here. Part one, understanding we got into a little bit of grants management to kind of set the stage, looked at some resources, looked at a document, we looked at an application, a real application. Then we also looked at an award document and looked at the terms and conditions. We talked about self-monitoring and evaluating and the importance there. We talked about managing, well, we did not a whole lot about managing budget because this is more about the regulations, but we did get into the regulations of record keeping. And then we talked about regulatory and compliance. Then we went into the actual regulations themselves, the uniform guidance, at least the statutory requirements, the 6 statutory requirements. Some of them carry over from prior administrations that became law through executive order. And now, as you saw, some of them actually, what's the word I'm looking for, matriculated into becoming actual citations in Subpart C of the Uniform Guide. That's what we did. We looked over Subpart A, which was definitions. And we needed to know what those definitions were. We looked at Subpart B, which is general provisions, mostly, exclusively pertaining to the federal agencies, how they get their marching orders, what they're supposed to do, and kind of maybe, hopefully, a little better understanding of why some of these regulations maybe we have a better understanding why those agencies are making us do these things because they're getting asked to do it. And then C is the pre-award requirements, which was kind of a combination of a few more agency requirements and then some things that pertain to us directly. Now, tomorrow, we are going to get into a very much deeper dive, D, E, and F. D is post-award requirements. Those are the regulations that pertain to us as recipients of federal funds once we receive the award. That's where we're going to look into the allocable, allowable, reasonable that we were talking about before, those 4 things. Subpart E is what's referred to as cost principles. What's allowable specifically. There are 55 of them that are listed. We're going to go through each and every one of them that are allowable or unallowable. And then with that Subpart E, cost principles with select items of cost, that's its full name. And then Subpart F, audit requirements, audit program reviews. There's 21 citations within Subpart F, and it goes into describe for the auditors how we as recipients are considered low risk or high risk. So we're going to get back into risk mitigation again in Subpart F, and then we'll close out tomorrow talking a little bit more about internal controls, policy, procedures, and some more resources. So please come back tomorrow. We'll have much more to go over. Okay. Not going to do the quiz. Yeah, this is tomorrow. I'm going to save this. I'm going to stop. This is where we're going to pick up tomorrow. Part 3, OMB's Uniform Guidance, 2 CFR Part 200, Super Circular, Subparts D, E, and F. That is tomorrow. So sharing, go back to Frame and Brooke, please, unless there are questions, please close us out.
So we can go ahead and wish everybody a great rest of their day, and we'll see y'all back tomorrow afternoon. And if you're not able to make it, no, don't fret. We are recording both of the sessions, and we will be posting them, and we'll email them to everybody who registered. So just in case you're not able to come back, don't worry. We'll record it and we'll send it out. Hi, Michelle.
Bye, Michelle.
All right, thanks everybody for coming. We'll see y'all tomorrow afternoon.